All right, well, welcome back. Becky Freemal with WFXR and our Virginia at Work series with me, Lynda McNutt Foster with Cortex Leadership Consulting. And Lynda and I have brought on some guests. I'll let you introduce our guests. How about that?
Absolutely. We brought Tommy back.
Tommy Strelka.
He's been wonderful all week, sort of working with us as Becky's been getting a lot of different questions, which we kind of knew, but we didn't know how many were going to be asked.
Absolutely.
And then we have Chris Head. He's a franchise owner with Betsy Head. We've had her on before. And
Right.
Chris is not only a delegate for the state of Virginia, but he's also an owner of Home Instead for 2 franchises here. And so we really thought that Chris was a really good one to bring on today to add to the conversation about what does an owner who has, do you have 300 employees? Roughly 300 employees. How is he dealing with the new law? What does that look like?
Right. So our last conversation was, of course, with Tommy Strelka. He practices employment law here in Roanoke and had all sorts of advice. But let's go toward Chris now, because since we have talked to Tommy, we have gotten inundated with questions upon questions from both employees and employers. From an employer's standpoint, it kind of seems like mass chaos.
That's a pretty good assessment. Yeah.
How are you? What are you doing as an employer to try and make this as little as mass chaos as possible?
Well, I mean, honestly, in about 2 weeks, my general manager and my wife and I are leaving town for a couple of days to go hole up somewhere and hash this out and take all of the financials and of the business and all of our compensation packages and all of the information that we have. And we have a big advantage in that our franchisor at Home Instead Senior Care, and they're based in Omaha, and I was just at a meeting over the last week and early part of this week with them. They've provided us an awful lot of resources to help us look at it. But we're going to literally take 2 days to go pull everything apart and try to put it back together so that we, first of all, don't adversely affect anyone's pay, because we want to make sure that in a restructuring of what we're going to have to do here, that everybody is making at least what they were making before. And maybe that we've got some room to bump some people a little bit, but we're going to have to change the way we do it. We've got about half of our administrative employees are salaried right now, and about the other half are hourly. Everybody is also on a bonus plan, and it's based on performance of the company and achieving their goals in their departments. And all of this has got to get looked at, because there's only so much money that you can spend on your employees, right? And so you've got this budgeted. The budget's not going to change. And that's the bottom line. Is the budget's not going to change. We just have to figure out how to do it differently to comply with the new law.
And let's talk, Lynda, here's a big question for you. This is not just about the legality of it all, even though that is obviously what has started all this. It's also about morale, making sure that when Chris has these conversations, he does it correctly. How do you handle this? You were talking about your own daughter was already kind of crushed with her morale on this.
My daughter works for an IT company out in Las Vegas, and she calls me and she goes, "You're doing that new overtime law story." She goes, "They've already implemented it at my company." And she goes, everybody is more senior than I am. She's 23 years old. And she goes, "Now every day I've been instructed I have to clock in and clock out on my computer constantly. When did I get in? When did I take a break? When did I go to lunch? When did I come back?" All of these things. And she goes, "Mom, it's so embarrassing." She goes, "Because everybody now knows what I make, because nobody else in the company is having to do it. So I work in a small company with really experienced IT people, so I feel so ashamed that I'm the only one having to do this." So I think this is really important. I really appreciated what Chris just said, because this is not just an HR director. I mean, all the HR directors I know are fantastic people. And if the CEOs of the company, if the main leaders of the company will do what they're about to do, I think that they will inclusively think about how this is going to affect each one of their employees as they make these changes.
And I think this is interesting. And Tommy, I'm going to ask this to you. And you said you probably won't make a lot of friends with this answer. But, we were talking about someone like Chris. If an employee comes to him and says, hey, how are we going to handle this? Is this going to affect me or my job? Unfortunately, your advice is don't do that.
Yes, it is. As ludicrous as it may sound, and as self-serving it is, because I am a plaintiff's employment attorney. But
right.
At the end of the day, this is the bizarre twist here, is that in most federal statutes, and the FLSA is a federal statute, if, for instance, you go up to your employer as an employee and you ask them questions about your rights and their duties and policies, typically these are protected questions under federal law. And your employer is not allowed under federal law to take any sort of adverse action based upon you having inquired or even complained about any of this activity. Think of laws like the Family Medical Leave Act or Title VII. The FLSA, this overtime law, does have a retaliation component. But here's the twist, is that the protected activities under the FLSA only include filing administrative complaints with the Department of Labor or filing a lawsuit. So in other words, if an employee goes to their employer to ask about their overtime policies, to question how things are going to happen, to maybe even complain about how they're being paid, none of that is protected, meaning that the employer can literally terminate that employee for having made those questions, for having gone down that path of inquiry or having made the complaint, and there's nothing illegal about it. There's might be things morally wrong with it. Now, is this situation likely to occur, especially with this big flux? I mean, the fact is most employers, of course, would never fire their employees for asking questions
Right.
about their overtime pay. But like as I was indicating earlier, a few rotten apples can do a lot of damage to the whole thing. And so as an attorney for employees who wants to err on the side of being adverse to risk and keeping your job, and with the risk of being self-serving, I have to say that it's my advice to go seek an attorney to ask them whether or not they are exempt or not under the FLSA and how they should approach their employer with any questions.
I have to kind of chime in on this because this is a really important issue. I think that most employees are terrified to ask their employer any kind of questions.
And
like
now they
this.
really are.
Anyway, so let's breathe through this for a second.
Find our third finger.
Right, and find the third finger. This is why I do what I do, because leaders need to be proactive about these things. Honest to goodness, this is happening to employers. It is their job as leaders to find a plan, create a plan, and figure out how to effectively communicate this to employees, just like any other change that's occurring. So I really want leaders to stand up, step up, and get in front of this. Becky has been overwhelmed with questions in 1 week. It is the top shared story that she's had. This is important. If you are a leader, you need to get in front of this. You need to find out all the nuts and bolts of it, spend some time, and figure out how to communicate this effectively.
And Chris, I was going to ask you that. How do you plan to do that? And advice, since you seem to be a little bit ahead of the 8 ball in comparison to other owners that we've spoken to maybe not put your employee in that situation that they have to ask.
Well, for one thing is that they already know that it's coming. Mm-hmm. And we've been very upfront to say, look, this is a major change, and we don't know how it's going to look yet, but we're going to work this out. And we try to be pretty open and communicative and supportive of our staff. If you build a good relationship with your staff and you are, and they trust you, mm-hmm. and hopefully if you're a decent employer, your employees trust you. They'll give you time to get this sorted out, because it's not going to happen. We'll come back if we do this in early October. We'll come back the next week and give them a plan, and even then, it's not going to be rolled out for another 6 weeks or so, mm-hmm. Before it starts affecting things. And then we'll know what the plan is and try to ease into it, so that it doesn't happen as a complete jolt to everybody's system. The difficulty with, too, and I think you talked about this a little bit, but I'm very concerned with the morale factor that this potentially could have, because when you move from being salaried and overtime exempt to
right.
being hourly, and there are going to be people that are going to get moved into that direction, but just because there's no other choice, you lose so much flexibility. If you've got an employee now that is qualified as salaried overtime exempt, and they want to take Thursday afternoon off because their kid's got a soccer game, and they want to go see that, that's fine, and they still get paid for the full day because they came in. Then they may come in on Saturday and make up some of the time. They don't get paid extra for that, but they get it all done. That gives them the flexibility. That goes out the window when you become hourly. You don't get to do that. When you leave, you clock out. One of the areas that we're very concerned with and how we're going to sort this out is how do you clock in and clock out? We've got certain employees that do field work supervising our other employees that currently may qualify and may not qualify based without a complete rewrite of the compensation plans. Again, we don't know what this is going to look like. But if you've got somebody that's making below that threshold and they do field work, they come into the office in the morning and then they leave. Well, somewhere during the course of the day, they're going to have lunch. How do they clock out when they're not in the office?
Right.
We don't know. I mean, we don't know how this is going to work, and trying to figure all this stuff out. And how then do you maintain the flexibility for the employees and know that you want to encourage them to put family first, but they can't afford to take the time off if they're not going to get paid? When are they going to get paid? When are we going to make this up? How are we going to account for the time? It's difficult. I mean, it really is going to be difficult. We will find a way through it, but I don't know what that's going to be yet.
Well, when I talked we were kind of communicating with Joyce Wall, president of the chamber this morning, and she sent me, I don't know whether it was a text, an email, she said there's actually a free app that has been developed. So we'll put a link to that to be able to clock employees in and out so they can do that mobily from their phones if they want to. So we'll provide that resource.
But then what if they forget?
Right. Yeah.
What if they forget? Are they on the clock? Are they not? How do you do that? It really it just adds a layer of complexity to life that I don't know what problem we're solving with this.
Here is a question for you too. We keep talking about December 1st. December 1st, that's the big day. But you're saying for you, it's going to affect you before December 1st.
It's before December 1st because, and Tom, chime in if I'm wrong here, but my understanding of the law is that it has to be in effect based on the day that you get paid, not when you work. So if you are paid in arrears and you get paid on December 1st for work that you did in November, then it has to be calculated for that time in November. So in our case, we pay semi-monthly. Our pay period ends on the last day of the month, and then we'll pay on the 10th and the 25th. So we go, the first half is paid on the 25th, and the back half is paid on the 10th of the following month. So that pay period that's paid on December the 10th already has to be factored in, which means we have to put this into effect November the 16th. Mm-hmm. And if anybody is paid monthly, but they're paid in arrears, they have to go into effect November the 1st. And so we're already operating on a short runway with this.
Right.
Okay. But it's shorter than if you're not paying attention to that. So
Tommy, is this one, when you say short runway, is this one of the biggest changes with this
Absolutely.
ever in history?
Absolutely. The only thing that could possibly be bigger would be a substantial increase in minimum wage, which the FLSA also covers, and there's a lot of talk about that, but there's also a lot of opposition to that. And I feel that just from an employment lawyer's speculative position here, that this was most likely more. There's arguments for and against what happened with the FLSA, but there also is a lot of argument that what happened with the FLSA is in part and parcel politically motivated or made for some political effect. This is being looked upon as a victory politically because the Department of Labor is an executive agency, and that, of course, is controlled by the Office of the President. So the Obama administration is looking at this as a victory. Whether that's truly, going to happen, be a victory or not, time is going to tell. But as Chris was saying, it's a really interesting part because he had heard the same thing that I had heard about the Obama administration indicating that there was going to be more than $10 billion injected into the middle class's wallets or the labor force's wallets over the next some years because of this change. But the well from which the money is paid doesn't change. The income levels for the employers doesn't change. There's no new stream coming in. We're just setting up extra regulation regarding how the stream is divided internally. So, it's anyone's guess as to how it's going to truly play out.
Look, and here it is. I'm going to tell you this.
Lynda's got her finger out.
I got the finger up. I work with a lot of business owners, a lot of leaders. They're smart people, right? I mean, they had to win the ultimate battle, which is to stay in business. So within 5 years, 80% of businesses are out of business. They will figure out how to do this, and they will figure it out with the current resources that they have.
Oh,
right?
absolutely, we will. Without any question, we will.
So
and here's the scary thing. If you want to talk about it, one of the things that I know some people are looking at, it doesn't affect us this way, but one of the options is if we've got to raise salaries up, then we can do that. But that means we have to get the same amount of work done with fewer people. And so you're going to end up with people that are working harder and having to spend more time at work than they already did because there are fewer of them, and until the business grows again. So that's the way the response always works. It's the same sort of thing with the minimum wage. Interestingly enough, I was just in Montreal. It was over the weekend, and then for the meetings that I was just in, and up there in a McDonald's, we walked into McDonald's. And there are no cash registers at the McDonald's. There are only kiosks that are touchscreen, self-serve, and you key in your own order, and then the people behind the counter simply call out the number and serve the food now. So they've eliminated with technology a big chunk of the employees that they needed. And part of that is because minimum wage climbed up to the point that it was cheaper to do it with technology than it was to do it with people. And I'm told in the fast food industry that for minimum wage, for example, people clamoring for minimum wage to go to $15 an hour. At $15 an hour, you can take the backstage stuff in a fast food restaurant and strip that down to where a fast food restaurant could be run with 3 people at a lunch rush because everything's done robotically. The technology already exists to make that happen. It's just not cost effective yet. You jack the wages up, now it is.
Right.
And you can't do this stuff artificially. There has to be something organic that starts driving this. And again, my concern, my frustration when I put my political hat on is that this was a solution in search of a problem. And if you do that long enough, eventually you'll create the problem. And I really am fearful that this is going to have a really, really negative effect overall economically on the country. I'm very concerned about it. Those of us that have been in business for a while, I'm not sure how smart we are, but we do just stay at it, we'll figure it out. We'll find a way to keep going. But she's absolutely right. We don't have but a certain amount of resources. And the alternative is, okay, so what do we do? Where do we get more resources? You end up having to raise your prices. Well, if you raise your prices, then customers can't afford as much unless they've also gotten increases in pay, and it
then it evens out anyway.
And ultimately it does.
Right.
Ultimately, it always sort of balances things back out. But I think the biggest concern is that this one was, if you look at when minimum wage has been raised in the past, and we talked about this a little earlier, Tommy, that minimum wage, the last time it jumped from $5.35 to $7.25, it didn't do it all in one jump, right? Mm-hmm. It went from $5.35 to I think $5.75, and then to $6.25, and then it went up in stages over a course of about 3.5 or 4 years. This is a better than 100% increase in one shot.
Right.
I mean, just boom. And
I think this is going to affect the amount of subcontractors that businesses use. I think it's going to dramatically affect the amount of technology. I think this is going to affect the workforce. And this is why it's so important for leaders to latch onto this, understand it, start communicating it. I do have to ask a question, though. If I'm, as an employer, say to my employees, come to me, I have an open door policy, you can ask anything you want. And then and still, if somebody came in and said, I want to talk to you, I want to have information, then I said, I fire you because you asked me the question.
That's not illegal.
That's just bad culture. Then
Yes,
I can't
very
get
bad.
Colossally
employees.
stupid.
It's
But it's,
colossally stupid.
but,
Okay, well, my leaders are not stupid.
Yes, so your leaders are okay.
I got great culture companies.
Well,
okay.
I want to.
legal and wise are not the same thing. You know?
Yes, exactly. Okay, we're going to wrap this podcast up. And again, I want to thank Chris Had with Homestead, Tommy Strelka, Roanoke attorney, and of course, Lynda McNutt Foster with Cortex Leadership. But just because we are wrapping this up does not mean we are yet finished. We have gotten inundated with questions. So stick around. We are going to come back with some more on questions we've heard, and Tommy is going to give us some answers from the legal world. All right, that's it.